Thank you. Hello, everybody, and thanks for joining us today. My name is Lisa Newberger Fernandez, and I'm the Global Head of Sustainability and Ecosystems for 374 Water, a clean tech company pioneering a new era in sustainable waste management and committed to creating a clean and healthy environment that sustains life. I am thrilled to be joined today by three trend-setting pioneers. We have John Smicha, VP of Circularity with the Green Biz Group. We have Nora Goldstein, editor of BioCycle. And we have Tom Ferguson, managing partner of Burnt Island Ventures. Today is a special day for us because we are launching Sustainable Futures with this event. Sustainable Futures is a new platform powered by 374 Water that's for pioneers and practitioners who are pushing the frontiers of waste, water, energy, and the circular economy. We come together to learn, operate, and to innovate. And today in our discussion, we're going to go through two key topics. One is about innovation. We want to hear from our speakers about what are those innovations that they're excited about this year in 2023, right at the frontier of these three fields. And the second topic is about tips that we can all use to break through the visible and the invisible barriers to driving adoption of these innovations. So to kick us off, I have two questions for all of us. One question is more personal, and we have, you can find incredible bios of all the speakers here online, but I want to hear things that you're not going to find online. So I want to hear, what was that turning point that got you into your sustainability career path? And the second topic is, what's one company that you are excited to watch grow in 2023 that's right at the frontier? So I'll kick off, and then I'll pass the baton. Turning point for me, well, I took a number of eye-opening environmental sciences classes in school. The real turning point for me came in 2007. I was living in the Bay Area, was newlywed, I was excited about having kids, and I became oddly obsessed with removing toxins from my household. So I turned to my friend who was the most knowledgeable sustainability person I knew at the time and asked her what to do. She quickly gave me a list of household products to remove, and then she asked me the question that changed the course of my career. She asked me if I'd like to invite my company to join the Net Impact Green Challenge. Well, when we won first prize in that competition, I found two new jobs for myself in sustainability. Fast forward 15 years, I've spent the last 15 years pushing our sustainability agenda at Accenture, both for our clients as well as advancing our own sustainability journey. And now my story comes full circle as I've joined a company that's able to eliminate the toxins from the environment. So it will be no surprise to you that the company I'm excited to watch grow and to help grow in 2023 is 374 Water. And two things that excites me about 374 Water. One is how we contribute to the circular economy, and two is how we help our customers advance their sustainability journey. We contribute to the circular economy because our technology is able to eliminate toxins from the environment and to recover the intrinsic value from the waste streams, whether the waste is sewage in waste treatment plants or whether it's industrial waste. And when we recover those valuable streams, we recover clean water, energy, and minerals. The water can go back into the processes. The minerals, things like phosphorus, which is a very finite mineral, can go back into the economy, and the energy can be used to power our system. In terms of how we advance our customers' sustainability agenda, there are really two ways. First of all, when we eliminate the pollutants, and we don't add more pollutants back into the environment. Our technology uses air as the oxidant and high pressure and high heat to eliminate toxins. The second way we advance sustainability is because our technology is decentralized. We put our We put our units on site, whether at a manufacturing plant, at a wastewater treatment plant, or in a community. And by siting our technology on site, we avoid the transportation of hauling the waste away, which would lead to more greenhouse gas emissions, cost, and liability. So enough from me. I'd like to pass the baton now to John on these two questions about your sustainability turning point and a company you're excited to watch in 2023.
Awesome. Thanks, Lisa. And thanks everybody for joining this discussion. I'm really excited about this. So I am a recovering chemist. I got a PhD in chemistry back in 2012. And I think during graduate school is when I really had my turning point. The first way it showed up is when I realized I didn't want to work in the lab anymore. I was tired of dealing with toxic chemicals on a daily basis. I just didn't want to do it anymore. And second, my project was actually trying to turn CO2 and water back into liquid fuels to sort of close the liquid fuel cycle. So I was developing catalysts for that. And that project got me excited about climate change, or not excited about, but interested in fighting climate change, and more interested in sustainability. And my career just sort of took off from there, getting into corporate sustainability after graduate school, and ultimately ending up here at GreenBiz, where I lead our circular economy work. The one company that I'm really excited about, and I had a few conversations with them last year, and I'm excited to see this work grow, is On, the running shoe brand out of Switzerland. So, they make running shoes and running equipment. They have a very audacious goal to be 100% circular, I believe, in the next 10 to 15 years. And what they introduced this past year was the Cloud Neo shoe that is all one material. It's available by subscription only. And when you're done with your pair of shoes, you send them back. They can grind them up and recycle all the materials back into a new shoe. And so the idea is that no shoe is going to be left behind, because you have a financial incentive as a rental model to send it back. And they're doing some other really interesting things in partnerships around chemistry and materials, and some other new business models that they're rolling out. And I'm really excited about a well-known brand sort of taking this initiative to just build that business within their business to support circular economy, and excited to see more companies do that. And that's all from me. I'm excited to hear from Nora and Tom.
Over to you, Nora.
Oh, great. Well, my story is a little different. I was actually born into sustainability. My father, when I was born, was editor of Organic Gardening and Farming magazine, published by a company called Rodale Press. And they also were known at the time for Prevention magazine. So a whole healthy eating, frame of living. And then in 1960, my father started a journal called Compost Science. And fast forward, this was always around me, very aware. My father was one of the people who helped initiate the USDA label that you see on products today. So just by being there became part of who I am. And then in the late 70s, he left Rodale and started a family business publishing company, and took the composting magazine, which then became BioCycle. And a year after, in 79, we started a magazine called In Business, which was a sustainable business and communities magazine. I talk about GreenBiz. I knew Joel McCoward during those early days. And so the company that I told Lisa a few minutes before starting I was going to cheat and name two companies, but I'll mostly focus on one. So the two companies I'm excited about both use decentralized solutions, similar to what Lisa was talking about. Both focus on food waste as a feedstock. And one is called Home Biogas, an Israeli-based company that's starting to market in the US with on-site solutions for managing food waste and turning it into biogas that's then used by that facility. And the brand new company just launched a couple weeks ago is called Mill Industries. They're introduced a device for households in the kitchen. It's a bin that looks a lot. It's a fancy schmancy, looks like a fancy schmancy trash bin. It's got a foot pedal. You put all your food scraps in there. I am a devout home composter, so this is a new experience for me. But I'm curious, very excited to see how both companies evolved in 2023.
Fantastic. And Tom, over to you.
Fascinating stuff, Nora. Yeah, I saw the announcement of Mill 2. I think it's bringing a logic of the nest to the bin. It's like, yeah, let's go. Actually the people of Nest to the bin as well. The turning point that's set on the path to sustainability. I mean, really graduating into the jaws of the financial crisis in 2008. It was kind of an interesting time. I always wonder whether or not I should say this kind of out loud as to whether or not it's going to fatally undermine my credibility. But what will follow will necessarily do that anyway. So let's go for it. I from the age of 10, I really wanted to be an actor. That was the whole plan. I went to the University of Edinburgh because it had the best acting program of anything out there, even though it was all student led, which was actually a really remarkable grounding in entrepreneurship. But when I graduated, I happened to study a lot about financial crises, didn't notice the one that was brewing in real time at that time. And anyway, as I graduated, basically all the work in acting dried up. And so I was faced with at least, multiple years of being at the bottom of the pile and not doing a huge amount with my time. And so suddenly I was faced with this existential crisis of what am I going to do with hopefully like 65 odd years of professional effort. And I sort of looked around at the various options available and figured that the planet could use a hand. So without really knowing much about what I was doing, I just I went and pleaded for a job at the good people at Environmental Resources Management, the pure sustainability consultancy that was bought by KKR last year. And that was an extraordinary grounding in everything from the EU emissions trading scheme and the state of carbon capture and storage. But that was where the introduction to water came. I was the author of the first water disclosure report for the Carbon Disclosure Project, by virtue of being the cheapest person in the building, as they took on that job on a pro bono basis. Anyway, so fast forward, I sort of magically become a water specialist in 2015, and 8 years later, water still hasn't let me go. Water has a way of doing that to people. In terms of the companies that we're excited about, all of the ones that we've invested in over the last 2 years, we are, I think, just in terms of the theme, obviously, of water waste and circularity, the one that I think really does bring all of those together is a company just north of Boston called Zwitterco, which raised a rather significant, certainly very significant for water, Series A fundraise at the beginning of this, or mid last year. They are a real step change in membrane filtration. Now, for those of you who know anything about the filtration of wastewater, which is like the best way of thinking about it is the active layer of filtration is called the membrane. It's what the water is forced through to take away all the nasties. Anyway, it's very good for people who make membranes because they tend to kind of go wrong every 3 months, and then you have to replace them, which is, it worked for Gillette. It works for people who provide membranes. Anyway, it looks like Zwitterco's the life and actually the effectiveness of filtration is phenomenal. And if they're right, if the current performance trend continues, what they're going to enable is a phenomenal amount of industrial and agricultural reuse. And really for us in terms of water, that's the key to everything. The way in which we keep water cheap and plentiful is to use the same molecule over and over and over again. And then there are a couple of things I know that we'll touch on, but I think, Alex and the team have got a very bright future indeed.
Fantastic. Well, you three did not disappoint. You raised several of the key trends in innovation on the front lines here, everything from closing the loop to green chemistry, membrane filtration, financial crises, and home composting. So now that we've looked at the frontier and some of these innovative trends, let's go one click deeper and really delve into how do we overcome those visible and also those invisible barriers to adoption of these innovative technologies and these innovative business models? Because as we all know, innovation is only as good as the adoption of that innovation. Doesn't really count until it's out there and into society. So for all the viewers out there, I want you to know that we're eager to have your questions, and we'll come on to them shortly. So please type any questions when they come into your mind into the QA box, and we'll come on to them in a minute. 3 barriers that we want to go through, if time permitting. The first is about consumer behavior change. And Nora, I'll start with you because you raised this with Mill. And curious for you to share tips that you've seen that allow these consumer products to stick. What do you think it is about Mill or other companies that you've seen that will make this home composting product stick?
Yeah, and quick clarification, Mill is not a home composting. I brought that up in my intro because I have been a practitioner of home composting for years, and Mill is a completely different approach to managing.
Set the record straight.
And that is a huge, now that the company's been launched a couple weeks, that's one of the confusing points, because similar devices for households do make claims that the output is a compost. And being somebody who's been an editor of a composting magazine for over 40 years, it does not. And what Mill did that distinguishes it is they don't make that claim, and they facilitate the utilization of that output for an ingredient for chicken feed. And happy to go into more detail for anybody who's interested. I was an advisor, more of a subject matter expert, so I have a little more, knowledge about it. But what has been a known challenge now for a long time is that food waste, when disposed in the landfill, emits methane before that landfill cell can be closed and capped and then capture the biogas. So it's a emission source of a very potent greenhouse gas. And so over the years, how are we going to get people to change their behavior around not just food waste, but any organic waste that, when composted or recycled, is a tremendous benefit as an input to soils. And when you have healthy soils, you have clean water. It's all works together. And but the focus on food waste was very much how are we going to get it out of the landfill? Plus the recognition over a decade ago that we waste so much food waste as consumers, and basically a third of the food we buy isn't consumed. So there's 2 things that are happening: is we're wasting resources on the growth, the creation and production and transfer of that food, and then once we have it, we're not eating it. So. But just fast forward to the vexing issue of food waste. It's one of those feedstocks that does not degrade gracefully. If any of you divert your food scraps at home and they're sitting on your counter, they get wet and sloppy in a hurry. And so part of the reluctance of getting households to participate in collection programs for curbside food scraps is that there's a yuck factor. And so Mill came into this sector having succeeded with products that change behavior, whether it's the iPhone way you get food delivered or the smart thermostat, with a device that not only addresses immediately that yuck factor, because you basically just put your foot on the pedal and scrape it in, or if you're prepping, put that in. But it's also convenient. You don't all you have to do is put it in, and over the next few weeks it fills, and eventually when it's filled, you empty it into a box that gets shipped back to Mill for additional processing. And so it really is an opportunity, a very decentralized opportunity to make the practice of diverting uneaten food. The challenge, and I'm curious to hear the conversation over the next bit of time, is the price point per entry. They are a subscription. They're going direct to consumer around a subscription. The price is $33 a month for a household. It's kind of what you said, John, about the sneaker. You have this device, and so how do you get adoption? It's innovation, but then how do you get adoption at a price point where a lot of communities in the cities in the US, you don't necessarily even see your trash bill because it's part of your property tax, or, so how do you feel that? And yes, when you divert your food waste, you are making an individual contribution to greenhouse gas reduction, and et cetera. I could go on and on, but I'm going to stop there because the tough nugget is, yes, you can innovate to create behavior change, but can those afford to do it?
John, one thing you've taught me about is where the responsibility lies for consumer behavior change. Interested in your perspective on where it lies between all the different actors, between the consumers, between the companies and the governments, et cetera.
Yeah, this is always a tough question because I don't think anybody's quite gotten it right yet from a circular economy perspective. But the way that I tend to think about it and the way that we tend to talk about it at GreenBiz is that the private sector has a responsibility to build a circular economy that is either as easy or hopefully even easier than the current economy for people to buy into, right? Like there's a responsibility from the private sector to sort of have people participate without even knowing. And that's a really tricky problem, but it's one that I think, Mill's actually a good example of this, right? One they're getting closer to, right? Because if the only extra step I have is to separate my food waste from my non-food waste, and I'm putting them in similar bins, that's much easier for me than having a bucket under my sink that I have to take out every couple days and put in my bin or put in my pile. And, so like they're starting to get closer to that place where the consumer participates in a very streamlined way. And I think there's a lot of opportunity here for the private sector to redesign products and processes for people to participate. There's also a lot of opportunity for public-private partnerships to build the infrastructure to actually do this, right? The reverse logistics, the recycling infrastructure, the composting infrastructure, all these things need to be built quite rapidly, actually, to address the problems we're running into with waste, especially. And so that's the way I think about it, is companies have the impetus to build the systems that people can easily participate in and hopefully affordably, because that's also a big challenge in waste. The incentives are backwards right now. I have a waste bin at my house that gets picked up once a week, and I get charged whether it's out on the curb or not. So my incentive, frankly, is to put things in there. Otherwise, I'm paying for nothing. And that's a backwards incentive, right? So we need government to step in and help with incentives. We need the private sector to step in and help with the processes and the products. And then we need them to work together on the infrastructure. So I guess that's a long way of saying this is a really difficult problem because we're not good at any of those things right now at a large scale.
Really thoughtful. Tom, I'd love to hear any challenges that you have on this topic and also on the second barrier, which is operational challenges that companies have, and how zeroing in on a real pain point that's so obvious to the customer can make a difference in how successful a company is even in running through a sales process, even in kind of traditionally viewed slow industries such as the water industry.
Yeah, and stuff with like don't contact this with a barge pole in the normal kind of economic received wisdom, which I happen to think is wrong, but what do I know? It's not necessarily, I think, a pushback, because I think both Nora and John have already decided this, but I suppose it's a strong statement of the case. I mean, it's not necessarily a skepticism around Mill. There are all sorts of examples ahead of it that maybe kind of behavior change is possible. But I happen to, certainly in terms of what we do in terms of the underwriting of new ideas, is that we have to think of people as essentially kind of inertia monsters, right? In that, like, our path dependency, we never want to do anything different ever, because like our lives are unbelievably busy. Like, we've only got one kid, and like I just feel like we're in the trenches taking grenades the whole time. How people do this with multiple children, I have no idea, right? Like, the idea of layering on, taking a tray out of the bottom of a garbage can that I'm paying $33 a month for is, and that remains a garbage can, and then having even just the slight inconvenience, I think, of having to then figure out whatever it is. I mean, it's like, look how bad people are at returning Amazon packages. Like, maybe there's a way of making this magically easy, and I really hope they unlock it. I used to work for one of my first kind of entrepreneurial experiences as a rent and MBA. I was not important to the overall running of it at all, was in a large scale kind of biogas startup in London. And the whole kind of just the infrastructure around the organic fraction of municipal solid waste is a labyrinthine forest, and kudos for them for having a go at it. But I just think when you think about just the UI and the UX of products, I just think like it looks to me like there could be a little bit of a behavioral leap there that I really hope they're right about. And they're much smarter than me, so no doubt that they actually kind of will be. When you think about like the iPhone, one of the myths about the iPhone is that there were no other touchscreens at that time. And it's just wrong. There were a lot of other touchscreens at that time. The market was absolutely ready for it. And what they did was make it utterly beautiful, and that the haptic overall interface to be something that you constantly wanted to play with when everything else was just a weird gray box. Same thing with food delivery. Like, we live at the time that the food delivery was there, just the propensity was absolutely there. We're starting to live on our phones, and suddenly you can call up takeout with a couple of touches of a button. There's no, like, you're reducing friction, not introducing friction. Same thing with the Nest thermostat. I don't know what the split is between actual people buying the box and then retrofitting it onto their houses. Certainly I see most of them coming up in new builds. Where people don't have to think about it at all, and they're just put in by the contractor. Again, reduction, not the addition of friction. So we'll see what happens with Mill. And it's a reasonable segue, I think, into what we look at. I mean, a lot of VC is focused on value, they call them vitamins or pain relievers, right? So vitamins is basically the pursuit of the dollar. So how does this make kind of more financial sense? We predicate almost all of our decisions on the removal of pain. The reason for this is that in water and waste is that the archetype of these markets is that they move very, very slowly. And slow is not a friend to venture capital, obviously. So the question is, like, what can make it fast? And the reason, and what we're after is people who really, really know they're miserable, right? That something about their life really sucks, whether or not they are allowed to spread post anaerobic digestion sludge to farmland. If you're not allowed to spread it anymore, where are you going to put it? It starts piling up on your premises, and that is stuff that you do not want piling up all over the place. If you can't hire people to do dispatch for your field crews within utilities, if you have a 22% vacancy rate, which the city of Houston does because of the onset of mass retirements, like, as you look down the list of what we're doing, really most of what we've invested in is a response to clear and present pain, because you then have the predilection for people to change. Once people are in a bad enough place, you then have a kind of an Overton window for behavior change, where you can override this idea of people being inertia monsters. I mean, one of the most important things I think in all company building is our definition of the segment, which is that each individual entrepreneur is looking for a segment. So it's a group of people that speak to each other, that share a pain point and experience that pain so acutely that they are willing and able to pay for an imperfect solution now to solve at least some of that pain. But it really all comes back to the only way to override my very, very dim view of people is that people have to be super uncomfortable, and then you swoop in to solve it if you're going to really kind of change behavior.
Can you give us an example? I love this concept of the painkillers and also the inertia monsters. I might need to borrow that one from you, but give us an example of a company that has one of these incredible pain points and that has used that to successfully.
Well, I mean,
solve a problem.
The worst pain point that we're seeing at the moment is PFAS, right? That's one of the worst in the market. It's just driven a truck through a whole load of stasis that was there in the water market. It really isn't here now anymore. If you look at kind of the whole value chain of like pretty much all of the wastewater like treatment plants, especially in the northeast of the country, is that where do you put what comes out of it? Where do you put the sludge? You put it on farmland. Not anymore.
Can I ask you to just define your terms, just in case there's anybody listening that has not yet heard of PFAS, because that's one of the things.
Yeah. So PFAS, they're long chain fluorocarbons, which is just a really in the 50s, the advent of the non-stick pan and raincoats that made the water sort of bobble on it and come straight off. This was a result of a group of substances called perfluoroalkyl substances, which is basically long chain fluorinated compounds, which are exceptionally good at repelling water but also fats, oils, grease, a whole bunch of different things, but they do not degrade in nature. So this is why they're called forever chemicals. And it would be fine if they were anodyne and okay and just sort of sat there okay in nature and didn't cause any problems. The problem is that what we're figuring out now is that these things are really very toxic indeed. We're pretty sure that the EPA's circular regulations are going to designate even relatively low concentrations of PFAS as hazardous waste. And the best way to think about that on a commercial basis is it's going to triple the cost of removing anything that is concentrated with PFAS. And one of the areas where PFAS is concentrated, landfill leachate is a big one. This is where our company Circularity is focusing, but also within municipal wastewater treatment. So after the anaerobic digestion process, which is really sort of where a lot of it goes, not exclusively, but a lot of it goes into the anaerobic digestion process of biogas, what's left over, it's called sludge. And that has very, very high concentrations of PFAS because it is not removed by the existing wastewater treatment process. Anyway, you spread that sludge to farmland, what you are basically spreading is high concentrations of PFAS. And if you just look at some of the case studies in Maine, you can actually watch some of the case studies in Maine with films like Dark Waters and various others. It's really not very good indeed. And water really relies on stasis, like the provision of such an important commodity. You really need to have predictable supply chains and like very, very high volume, but quite sensitive value chains moving through the overall process. Anyway, you start removing key steps within it and bad stuff happens rather quickly. And really, just a very long story short, I do apologize. Like PFAS destruction, and it's an absolute non-negotiable. The removal of it is relatively straightforward, but it's the destruction of it that's key. And we are looking at that, as I say, with a company called Circularity that does this on a basis of electrochemical oxidation. They're based just north of Boston. Julie, who runs it, is a really exceptional scientist and CEO. And it's just, you know, it's as big a window for behavior change as we have ever seen in water.
And thanks for educating us. One of the things I find about PFAS is that many people know about it and are really focused on it, and many people have not heard of it yet. So thank you for explaining it in a really easy to understand way. Yes, definitely watch the movie. Go ahead.
Could I just tag on to what Tom just said a little bit? Because one of the things that I find remarkable, the whole pain thing, when we had the first, like when gas prices soared, I can't remember how many years ago, we actually did see people taking public transportation or driving smaller cars. This past round, I didn't see that as much in the media. So definitely pain equals, if it's a painful enough over a certain amount of time, equals change. But there's one thing, a phenomenon that's been going on that I see very little pushback. And that is where corporations, you know, those who are making products that may or may not be harmful, or that may not facilitate circularity, where they are doing changes, and nothing is clearer than when you used to buy a 5-pound bag of sugar and now it's a 4-pound bag of sugar. And it's not like the price came down. And you see that, I mean, I love to cook, so I see it across the board. And they're just like, so big companies can make change without, and consumers are just going along. I mean, I'm sure there's been pushback, but that's a nut that, like, how can we take that shrinkage thing and transfer it over to making changes where the consumer isn't even quite aware, but they're doing a positive thing? So I just wanted to interject that into the conversation, because to me, when we're, so much is concentrated at the corporate level and where there is ability to change. So I just wanted to throw that into the conversation.
Thanks, Nora. John, I wonder if you could build on this a bit and share your perspective on what companies often get wrong when they're trying to make these changes and these shifts into the circular economy, and what companies might be able to learn from durable goods companies who are making that shift kind of naturally.
Yeah, I think the first major mistake is when people think that circular economy is just better recycling. That is 100% not true. It will never succeed in getting us where we need to be on the circular economy progression. We do need better recycling, but we also need a whole bunch of other stuff. And that starts with product design and sort of upstream supply chain thinking, right? So I need to, as a company producing products that people are going to use, I need to make sure that those products, A, perform, B, are affordable, and C, I'm designing them with end of life or end of first use in mind, right? And that could be any number of things. It could be remanufacturability, repair, simply material reduction at the outset, or recycling if it comes to that. But I think the biggest mistake people make is thinking, if we just build the recycling infrastructure, we'll be fine. And it just doesn't pencil out. The recycling industry is not set up to cycle products at their highest and best use infinitely, right? We downgrade materials when we mechanically recycle them. There's issues with advanced chemical recycling that still need to be worked out. So that's the first mistake. The second mistake, I think, is when a company thinks that they can simply get to 100% circularity on their own. I don't think there's too many companies out there that are big enough and have the sort of the know-how and the infrastructure and the capabilities to implement circular economy on their own. So On is actually a good example of this, right? They built partnerships with chemical and material companies. They built partnerships with reverse logistics companies and warehousing. They had to build all of these partnerships just to make one product more circular. And you have to do that with every product or every business line because it's really, really hard to do it alone. One example in the durable products industry that I think is sort of exciting is what a lot of the asphalt shingle companies are doing now. So they have, in some ways, a built-in advantage in that every time their shingles go onto a roof, at some point, somebody's going to be taking those shingles off and throwing them in a dumpster. And so you're consolidating them in a construction and demolition dumpster or construction and demolition landfill. And so what they've started to do is they've started to build the reverse logistics to get those asphalt shingles back, grind them up, be able to reuse some of the asphalt and some of the rocks in new shingles. And so they've built this sort of closed loop based on that inherent advantage they had where you already had a place. You know, asphalt shingles don't move once they're installed until they're taken off a roof. And so I think, you know, that's one way that the durable products folks have tackled this. Another way is something that's happened for a really, really long time. And I think we all sort of take for granted the fact that it's somewhat of a circular solution is just the repair and remanufacturing of heavy equipment and automotive parts, right? We've been leasing cars for decades and people are happy with it. So we know that product as a service is one way that we can implement circularity. We've been repairing cars and rebuilding engines on heavy machinery for decades and decades. And some of the existing companies like John Deere and Caterpillar and Ingersoll Rand are leading on this, right? They know how to rebuild an engine. They know how to keep a product in service for a really long time. Growing up, we had 1950s era John Deere tractors on our farm. And so they already know how to do this. And now it's just a matter of taking all those things that we've learned from the industries that are doing well and applying them to the industries that aren't, like apparel and technology and packaging and consumer packaged goods, where a lot of that stuff is ending up as waste. So I think that some of the underlying principles and business models are there. We just need to learn from what we've already done.
Any other examples from Tom or Nora of companies that are doing this thing that John describes as building a business within a business to deal with the valuable waste that's being recovered from a process?
I mean, the business within a business, I mean, it's sort of interesting always where I mean, certainly with water companies, where the actual kind of the business model comes from, given that water's usually quite cheap. I mean, one of the pieces of logic of sort of certainly Aquafortis and Switico, I mean, Aquafortis could be used to, certainly in terms of the fractional treatment of, I was going to say brines. People always just think of salty water. Basically, just really nasty wastewater streams from a variety of different, industrial and agricultural processes. Basically, the idea is, I always think of, so the Ohio River used to set on fire all the time in the 19th century. Like, that was because the only useful fraction of oil was kerosene. And then we found useful things to do with all of the rest of oil. Though obviously that's a bit like third rail in the context of the climate crisis at the moment. But nonetheless, plastics and all the rest of it. We have a major problem if we're going to do the really big recycling, which is basically replicating the water cycle via the medium of desalination in particular, is that we're going to have to get really, really, really good at dealing with salt and very, very salty waste streams. And so actually, like, figuring out the isolation of everything from magnesium to copper to phosphates to potash to whatever you can basically pull out of, like, whatever has been put into the water stream. That's going to be a huge part of Aquafortis's value proposition. Similarly, like, high protein content is going to be a big part of where Zwitico is hopefully going to make a very large amount of money. I think one of the ways in which it's useful to appraise, I think, water businesses is the ancillary drivers of it. Shower stream, for example, it's great to save hotels 22% on their water, as that they have just proven as of yesterday with Extended Stay America. But really, the driver for Extended Stay America is the reduction in energy. And then there's a whole bunch of managerial stuff from, like, understanding what's going on, because, like, heating up water is really hard. Like, it takes loads of energy to heat up water, and if you're wasting hot water, not a good idea. But in terms of the internal side of things, yeah, I mean, there are a few kind of, like, interesting examples. There are billboards all over New York for the moment for rehabilitated electronics, and I think the point that I was going to make, and hopefully Nora will have something more salient, is that the commercial logic of electronics opens themselves up to their own weakness. Like, Apple looks impregnable at the moment, but it's likely at these kind of price points that people will be like, well, how different is the iPhone 16, like, mega ultra super duper pro with, like, yet another lens on the front of it? And would I actually prefer just having a rehabbed i14 Pro Max, whatever, at $500 rather than $1,400, which is where the price model and logic is going? And with each additional increment to the price, as well as whatever the hell's going to be going on in the consumer and macro atmosphere, it opens up to a fairly classic kind of Christensen. I really use this word very, very, very carefully, but disruption. because, as you go up and up and up and up and up and upstream, you open up real estate behind you for stuff that isn't quite as fancy, but really is just way more than the customer already needs. Anyway, that wasn't a particularly good answer to your question. Nora, do you have a better one?
Yeah. And Nora, as you jump in here, I'd also love to layer on our third about regulations. We've talked about consumer behavior change. We've talked about operational challenges, and we've danced around regulation. And you have a deep experience there. So what can we learn from past failures about regulation that can drive these changes?
Well, I think, it's interesting thinking of examples. I came up with a couple, but not as, I think John's remanufacturing is, awesome. We've seen that because we have a lot of heavy equipment in our industry, and really seeing that take hold it's cool. And I don't even think about it anymore. It's just one of those things that exists, which is obviously a good place to be, because it means it's more common practice. But I think the thing with the regulations, and PFAS is a really good example, where there's the alarm over the identification of it. And so you have states and EPA rushing to set really slow, very strict limits on what's allowed in the water or the soil or, whatever. Yet the true risk assessment of what you need to do really sound science around setting limits hasn't been done. So it's a bit reactive. And the danger is, and Tom pointed this out with the case in Maine, where they adopted they went all out and did a ban. And not all of the soil contamination in Maine was, from biosolids. There was historic use of paper mill sludge and whatnot. So, but the point I want to make when it comes to this is that when you disrupt that severely, you have wastewater treatment plants in Maine that traditionally have taken a Class A or a Class B biosolids product, which is, the industry's term for sludge. It's a treated solid, and recycled it. And now you have them with no other option than the landfill. And the landfill, I think there's in Maine, I can't remember the number, aren't welcoming it with open arms. It's problematic for them. So when you set and make policy and regulations without a real knowledge of the pathways, and the thing with PFAS, and I don't want to go any deeper because that's where I get dangerous. But the thing with PFAS, we all have it in our blood because the pathway of exposure to PFAS came from our frying pan, came from our dental floss. We're putting it in our bodies. It's there in our bodies. If you're, driving with you're sitting on your fresh couch loaded with flame retardants, the dust that pops up. So that's where you're looking at pathways of exposure and really knowing who's the most exposed individual. And all this was really hammered out in the 80s when they established federal regulations for sewage sludge, for biosolids. And so one of the things that I recognize it, but I really hesitate for the knee jerk, for just saying this is the regulation, when it's almost impossible to meet it because this is ubiquitous. So I think the one tool, and I would love to hear Tom and John's and yours with regard to this, is those who are managing organic waste streams that have PFAS, the burden falls on them, right? And so here we want to do these good things to recycle water, recycle solids, recycle food, and they're PFAS. And so now we're, what are we supposed to do? And so this is where do you flip and go upstream and say, you cannot be producing these chemicals. We understand the use in flame retardants and firefighting foam, but the tool, and it doesn't directly apply, perhaps, but it's called extended producer responsibility, which we're seeing in the packaging world, and where the manufacturer is responsible ultimately for the managing that cradle to grave and how the tools that they use. But it's I think the point I really want to make when it comes to regulations is everything has to sync in order for it to be effective. And what you can't do with something as ubiquitous as PFAS and prevalent is just cut people off at the knees, those who are responsible for managing these materials.
Thank you. I want to come on to an audience question and to give everyone a chance to share the big message that they want everyone to take home with us today. And the audience question is about surprises. What really surprised you in 2022 that you're going to bring into this new year and do things differently? And then what's one key message from today's session that you want people to remember? So I'll start and we can go around. I'll pass the baton again. And the thing that really surprised me this year was to learn about PFAS. I was one of those people that somehow had not heard about PFAS until 2022, and now very focused on mobilizing a brain trust around the future of PFAS and what can we do across sectors to create a PFAS-free world. What would that look like? What are the steps that we could take? And really, to your point, Nora, about the different responsibilities up and down the chain, from stopping the ceasing to produce the chemicals at the front and the products, to cleaning up the mess. And that's where new technologies like 374 Water's AirSquo comes in to really clean up the mess in the waste streams, in the human or the industrial waste streams. And then there's the creative side, the creating new products and new chemicals that won't cause the same problems that PFAS did. I spoke with a scientist this week at Duke University, and he said that the greatest risk of exposure for people happens when we're switching from one chemical to the next, because the new class of chemicals may be worse than the previous one. So it's something to watch out for as we're doing innovation into new products and new chemicals. This is actually a really risky time to be in. And my one message to focus on is this point about innovation and adoption. Innovation is great, but it's only worth watching if it actually sticks, if it can, get past the consumer adoption change, get past the operational challenges, get past the regulatory challenges, and really be adopted all across society. So with that, I pass the baton to John as a surprise and a message to leave us with.
Yeah. I guess I don't know how surprised I was by this, but it was more pleasantly excited. The industries that are contributing the most to the global waste issue right now are really started to make a lot of moves in 2022 to address that. And we're going to be in a sort of messy situation here as we transition. Nora pointed to this, right? Like, what do we do with sewer sludge if it's got PFAS in it, because we're going to have PFAS for a while. So we're in this sticky transition period right now. But when I think about some industries that are starting to move pretty aggressively towards a more circular economy, I think of consumer electronics, right? Some of the big names are really investing a lot in being able to harvest materials back from their products and reuse them. That's exciting. We're also starting to see a big increase in lithium ion recycling infrastructure that's going to be crucial, not only for all these consumer electronics, but also for our electric vehicles that hopefully we'll all be driving or not driving, whatever, soon. So consumer electronics is one place. Fashion and apparel is another one, right? They are maybe not for the right reasons, really starting to invest a lot in design and take back and recycling and just all the infrastructure that goes around circularity. And that runs the gamut from sort of high-end brands and the ones like Nike, to fast fashion like H&M, they're all sort of putting a lot of resources into circularity. And I think while they've got a lot of work to do, that's exciting. And then we're starting to see more and more push for better packaging. And I think this has probably been a long theme, but big players are really starting to get into it, right? Walmart is now hosting an innovation award around packaging and providing resources to the people that win it to try to scale up those innovative packaging solutions that are more circular. So I guess general excitement around this acknowledgement that waste is a really big issue. And I think for too long, it hasn't been acknowledged to the extent it should be. And I don't know if that answers the second half of your question or not.
One message you hope we'll take away from today.
I mean, I think the big message is that, waste in any sector is a bigger problem than we often realize in North America, because we have very good methods of getting waste away from us. And I think we all need to recognize collectively that it is a big issue, that it not only contributes to sort of unsustainable practices on this planet, but also contributes heavily to climate change, because energy and emissions go into making all those materials that we're wasting. And so I think just sort of centering this idea of being more efficient, being more circular with our materials, I think is super important for anybody working at a company or an NGO or just living their lives. So that's my message, I guess.
Watch the waste. Nora, yes. A surprise and a message.
Sure. I am 100% in agreement with both of you said as far as the message. I probably may have the most years in among all of us working in this sector, and BioCycle wasn't always just in the organic side. We did basic recycling for years and years and years, and pushed a lot of what John was just saying. But my biggest surprise last year was when my daughter was buying an electric vehicle, and I went with her, and I just thought it was cool how I couldn't begin to tell you how it works, but one of the biggest concerns with electric vehicles is range anxiety. Like, you're just not sure you're going to get there before you can get to a recharge station. And they have ways of making the range better and better remotely. Again, no idea how it works. I think Mill will be using some of that technology. I'm not 100% sure. That's just my lack of understanding. And so I just think the ability, if we can get the adoption to continually improve the products, is really cool. And as far as a message is, it's adoption is critical, and just change it. Everything takes so much time. So I think the more that corporate, those who can really affect a lot of people at one time can start to do that innovation, and really commit to it. Like John was just saying about Walmart, I've seen it among other packaging companies. So it's like, how do we, just go, but make sure you're doing it right. Don't make it a smokescreen and greenwashing, because we did that in the 90s and that didn't go well. So
adoption. Let's get those inertia monsters. Tom, over to you.
Yeah, no surprise, I've already mentioned it, but we knew it was coming. But the mass wave of retirements in the water sector, which is not something that you want to happen, is here. The amount of people who are retiring from the water sector without being able to be adequately replaced is pretty serious, and it creates very large opportunities for early stage companies, but it's enormously underreported and very, very, very concerning. But also there are two ideas that I would like people to take away with them. First, and both of them I think are absolutely outrageous. Firstly, we have given the kilowatt hour an unbelievably large amount of support over the last decades, creating enormous industries that hopefully are going to save the planet. And I think it's high time that we gave the gallon of water the same kind of support that the kilowatt hour did. And if we do, We're going to get rid of the water crisis because water reuse is going to make an abundant amount of sense. And frankly, I think it's bullshit that it hasn't happened yet. And it relates to the second idea, which is very, very, very simple, is that it is absolutely insane that the US does not have a Department of Water in the same way that it does not have a Department of Energy. So if you can go and proselytize everybody that you know to say that it's time that we gave the gallon the same degree of support as a kilowatt hour, and that we need a Department of Water in the United States, yeah, it would be big.
That's great. You heard it here, folks. You heard it here first, folks. We need a Department of Water in the United States. Let's see if we watch the water, watch the waste. And thank you. I want to thank our three amazing panelists. Now you can see why we were so excited to have you with us here today to launch Sustainable Futures. Thank you for investing your time and your passion and your great insights with us. And a big thank you to the 374 team, the 374 Water team who made this event happen today. Yes, that's you, Hila, and Doug, and others. Thank you very much. And thank you to everyone who tuned in. Hope you enjoyed this. We're interested in your feedback and comments. You can find us on Twitter and LinkedIn and at 374water.com. There will be more events in this series coming soon. So stay in touch with us, connect with us, and have a great rest of your day. Thanks, everybody.
Thank you.
Thanks, everyone. All the best.